I will formally kick this off. So, welcome everybody. This is the 9th UNEP Digital Discovery session. Very welcome, big welcome to everybody. Happy to have you here. Now, for those that have not attended one of these sessions before, these digital discovery sessions are really designed to support our new fantastic mandate on digital transformation. And this mandate was given to us on the 17th of February, 2021, this year, by the UN Environmental Assembly. So these sessions offer us a monthly opportunity for UNEP colleagues, together with our partners and collaborators, to really learn about a concrete environmental application of digital transformation. So a very concrete, practical use case from the public sector, from the private sector, from civil society. And we try to pick use cases which really show the kind of transformation that is possible. So in this digital discovery session, we aim to provide really a safe space for peer-to-peer exchange, for shared learning, for networking, and really we hope to generate some follow-up action. And in the process of all of that, we also hope to have some fun. So today, I'd like to also welcome a number of participants that I understand are coming from the Coalition for Digital Environmental Sustainability codes that we recently launched on the 31st of March as part of the Secretary General's Digital Cooperation Roadmap. So welcome colleagues that are new, that are from codes. And I'm really pleased to introduce today's session that'll focus on the data visualization initiative of the Canadian Energy Regulator. And our two speakers today who will lead the session, we have Jagoda Walny, who currently leads the UX and Data Visualization Design Group at the Canadian Energy Regulator. And we have Annette Hester, who heads TheHesterView Inc, and she can tell you about that. And Hester really focuses on making data much more approachable, effective, and obviously visual. So in terms of the format today, we're going to break this session up into a few segments of around 15 to 20 minutes. So we'll have a segment followed by questions and answers, segment, questions and answers. And the entire session should last between 1.5 and 2 hours, depending on how much engagement we get. So please feel free to use the chat, to share key links, to share ideas, and ultimately to share questions when we move into Q&A. And I think that's all the housekeeping. So without further delay, I'll hand it over to Jagoda and Annette to lead the session.
Well, thanks, David. Welcome, everyone. I'm Annette Hester, and I've been doing digital transformation in provincial governments in Alberta at the Inter-American Development Bank. I did a big project, and then with the government of Canada. And this session is really, for us, a look back. I was part of first looking at how the organization, the Canada Energy Regulator, the CER, would do a transformation, what it would be like, and did a lot of discovery and look at a pilot project, and then undertook a 3-year that was more like almost 4.5 by the time we are said and done, to now it's been almost a year that this is over, that has been over, and we are looking at the sustainability. And Jagoda will talk about herself, but aside from the fact that she's there now, what we want to focus on is the fact that she was the lead on the design team of this transformation process. So I'll let Jagoda tell about where she's coming from today.
Sure, thanks Annette. So as you heard, I am currently at the Canada Energy Regulator, but while the DVI was happening, I was actually a postdoc at the University of Calgary, and I was basically the design team lead for, from a technical perspective at least, for this initiative. So as a result of the initiative, I am now at the Canada Energy Regulator, but my relevant experience today is my personal experience as a postdoc and as a data visualization specialist. So. And I'll start sharing my screen here.
So as we were saying, this is an actual transformation of an organization, and we'll tell you a little bit of the story of how this came about. And the story is about the CER, but it actually could be about any organization because, in my experience, they are not dissimilar. We have the story started at the CER about 10 years ago when the management team decided to, Jagoda, can you move the slide?
Oh, yeah.
When the management team basically logged into the idea that data was an asset, and a lot of the management were doing courses at Harvard about regulation, which looked at to the future to say that data was a really important asset, and that in order to make better decisions forward, you needed to analyze the data that you had. So they all came back after their courses and so on and decided, how do we action this off? In very government style, the first thing they did is they put together a data unit. And the data unit was supposed to deliver analytics, and the analytics for management and so on to make, and the organization to make quote unquote evidence-based decisions. Well, the unit started and they had got some people from the organization and have a director and a responsible VP. And a year later, they go and analyze and do a review and find out that they actually didn't produce any analytics, and they hadn't really been able to get buy-in or do anything. So they did what governments often do. They do a review, they do a learn, and they do an action. And the action was to hire more people, to get more buy-in from management, and assign a senior VP for that. And said, okay, now it's going to work. And as a matter of fact, it didn't work. So they went through virtually almost 10 years, not by then was 8 years, and they went through the cycle quite a few times. And they kept adapting the unit and bringing different people in and using the model and trying to create data governance and bring things together for analytics. And it was really disjointed, and they couldn't get the organization to move along. And the unit itself was not really recognized as an expert unit. It wasn't an expert unit. So the management looked at this and said, okay, we haven't been able to generate I can see, sounds like UNEP. I was going to say, it sounds like any organization. It's not unique to the CER. It's not unique to UNEP. So they said, okay, we can't do analytics. And we obviously don't get this. Let's just use this unit to do reporting. Let's report on our data. So when the unit started reporting on their data, and they kind of unlocked this box, they start saying, oh, the data is really of poor quality. Like, we don't have enough data, we don't have this data, we don't have that data, this data is incomplete, there's no standards, people are keeping it in separate systems, the systems don't talk to one another, we don't even know what systems we have, this is legacy stuff, and sort of the quality of it was they were sort of baffled at how we're going to bring this whole thing together. And from the perspective of the specialists that use the data sets, what they were hearing all the time is, your baby is ugly. Because they know their data sets are incomplete. You don't need to tell them that. They work with these things every day in, day out. They know every single wart and broken toe and whatever that the data has. They know all the inadequacies. So to hear all the time, your data is of poor quality, your data is incomplete, and that's what they use every day to do their business, really makes them feel very personal, that you telling them all the time that they are bad and they are ugly, and then they react to their reaction to the team is like, I don't want anything to do with you. You don't bring any value. Don't help me out and tell me I'm ugly. Like, duh, like I don't want it. So it creates all this. And at the same time that this was happening, a new CEO comes into the organization. And the CEO thinks that we can't just keep doing the same thing over and over again. We've got to do something different. What is it that we can do? And how can we do this differently? And the idea behind it was to say, let's...
No, tenés que ir al link de abajo.
Perdón?
Go ahead, I've muted. Okay. There was somebody unmuted. Go ahead.
Okay. So the standard wasn't good enough. So what they decided to do was to create disruption without... Can you move the slide, please? Yes. Create disruption without destruction. So the idea is to disrupt what's happening, to create a momentum to do things differently. Yet you have to keep in mind that the organization needs to deliver everything that they have been delivering without being able to stop. It's not like everything is going to stop the world, I want to get off or something like that. It's and reset everything. You can't. So you have to reset and change while continuing with everyday business. How do you do that? This is where we thought about a catalyst to change this. How do you do a catalyst? And this is the point where I'm coming into the organization in a way as a catalyst, but what really is the catalyst, in our view, is to use data visualization as a catalyst for change. Why data visualization? Because I'm going to let Jagoda talk about this, but when we started by doing a pilot.
Trying to organize a second exchange session.
Sorry, 1 second. We have a colleague who's not muted. I'm going to mute everyone, and then I'm going to put you back on, so just give me a second. Okay, Jagoda and Annette, can you guys unmute yourselves and then go back on, please?
Got it.
Perfect.
So basically what we decided is let's test and see if this approach would work. I had done something similar, somewhat similar to at the Inter-American Development Bank. Had learned a lot of lessons, which we'll talk about it later. But I know that this approach is really effective. And why? Because instead of telling your baby is ugly, you say, I'm going to make your baby beautiful. I'm going to take your baby and I'm going to nurture that baby. and I'm going to showcase that baby to the world. And everybody's going to fall in love with your baby. And there isn't a data scientist that when you tell them that, when you tell them that, they just go, of course, I love it. And that's what we did. We took 3 months, put together a team that already had a lot of experience in doing that, took the lead publication of the organization, which is the forecast for energy use, demand, and supply for Canada. It's produced by the CER. It's numeric, it's quantitative data. It's quite easy to visualize. So basically you have here a bar chart. There's some other features, but it isn't really complex from a data visualization perspective. But it was a way of taking the idea and the concept, making it happen. We did 4 visualizations, and this allowed the CEO to basically sell the idea of a big project, get internal buy-in and buy-in from the commissioners and the leadership to say this might be viable, and if not, we're going to learn something different. Why in the story of data visualization, I'll turn it over to Jagoda.
All right, thank you. So why use data visualization for this? The punchline is because it harnesses the power of the human visual processing system to make data meaningful and accessible to a wide variety of audiences. If you have ever pulled up a whiteboard to create a quick sketch in a meeting, you know how important visual artifacts are to gaining a shared understanding of a concept. No doubt many of you feel this very acutely right now, working remotely. And this is because our visual processing systems are incredibly powerful. We know from perception and cognition science that the majority of the sensory information processed by our brains is visual. Visual information can also be more memorable. So John Medina, molecular biologist who focuses on the development of the human brain, will tell you that after 3 days, people will remember 10% of what they hear, 25% of what they read, and 65% of what they see. And we also tend to create visual representations ourselves to understand concepts or ideas, whether that's intricate 3D models, careful floor plans, or just basic sketches in notebooks. And why should data be any different in this respect? Data visualization is a tool that can take data from this sort of abstract, intangible form where it's difficult to understand patterns to something that can be more easily processed by our minds, something with a shape, something we can poke around and explore. And it can even be something that can evoke emotions and tell stories, like this guns visualization from Periscopic. And that really unlocks the possibilities of open data from something that you can only understand when you have data analysis skills to something you can explore and understand even just a little just by going to a website. It really lowers the barrier to entry for understanding the data, and it really increases the chances that people will engage with your data. Data visualization can show your data rather than just telling you about it. So you can tell me that $100 million cut to the US federal budget is only a fraction of the full $3.5 trillion budget. Or you can show me, like Information is Beautiful does here. You can tell me that vaccines work, or you can show me what happens to infection rates after a vaccine is introduced, like this graphic from the Wall Street Journal. So our design team at the U of C for the data visualization initiative was tasked with taking data sets that were used internally by data experts at the CER and then turning them into products that were accessible and available and engaging to the public online. And we also held a few public engagement events with the visualizations. And this was really where we could see the power of the visualizations as this shared visual artifact. The visualizations were a great mediator for conversations about data. You know, they drew interest of people passing by. They made it easier for our data experts to talk to passersby about specific stories in the data. But we also learned that to effectively make the data accessible and available, the data sets themselves needed to be designed. So for us as a design team, as complete outsiders to the data, it was our job to talk to the data experts, understand what was in the data, ask questions, and then make requests for changes. So the data set that we got at the beginning was more often than not very different from the data that we got at the end of the process. So for this visualization of pipeline incidents, we actually initially had over 100 columns of data. And you can see each column here represents the columns we ended up with. So it was our job to choose the columns that would be more relevant. But not only that, we questioned things like the name of the columns. So when you see this column called what happened and another one called why it happened, those were initially called basic or immediate cause. And none of us could understand what that actually meant. Yeah, and after talking to the data experts repeatedly, one of them said, look, basic is what happened, immediate is why it happened. And that's how these columns got their names. So those kinds of stories, that sort of thing happens all the time. And in the process, it also helps the data experts to adjust the governance of their own data sets. Let's see if we can get to the next slide here. So we often hear that clear writing is a sign of clear thinking. And in some ways, that the same thing can be said for data. The process of creating the visualization requires a back and forth with the data experts to clarify and understand the data that's being used. When you're designing for the public, a public audience, you cannot assume that they have the same data skills or domain knowledge that the experts have. So the process of questioning the data for the purpose of release for the public can really shape how your essential information is organized and presented. And all of this is quite a bit of work, especially creating a custom data visualization is a messy back and forth process that takes time and resources. This level of customization isn't possible for every data set. It's also not right for every data set. You might want a simple dashboard instead. But when you do go through this process, in the end, you can get both an engaging visualization and a clean data set that's easier to use. You can make your information available to people who don't have the time or skills to analyze it themselves, but who still have the interest to interrogate the data and try to understand it better. So through this process, you've organized your data set for public use and for your own use. You essentially have two different structured data sets at this point, and you've transformed by doing. And I'll hand it over to Annette for a couple more minutes.
Yes. Basically, so when we were looking at the overall initiative, what were the objectives? Because the objective was to create sustainable change. Sustainable was really, really important because that's one of the failings of the project we had done at the Inter-American Development Bank. We created change, but we didn't really change the organization. So it sparked some changes, but it wasn't a systematic, intentional thought. And in the data visualization initiative, the sustainability of this initiative was first and foremost. So in order to do that, you need to build capacity. You need to have the people eventually. And that happens to be one of the most difficult things that we encountered, which we can talk about it after. We also had to establish a methodology because otherwise the information or the method of doing stuff becomes stored in somebody's computer or not part of the institutional memory of the organization. So how do you make that become part of the organization's institutional memory and not embedded in a team or a person, and that team disband and then you don't have it anymore? How do you understand in this process the fundamental data of the organization so that the organization recognizes what are their actually core data sets? How do you showcase those core data sets so that you start focusing on really strengthening and making your data sets healthy? Because I won't even talk about complete, that doesn't exist, but it exists of healthy data sets. And you also ensure that the organization is seen as a leader, because that leads to trust. And trust on the data and trust on the organization it continues to be a really important element in this day, so that the data from this organization is trusted. And that was really, really, really important. So those were the 4 main objectives that I'm confident that if you now were to interview the CEO or others or our lead, and you ask what were the objectives, everyone was very clear. We were all very, very clear about the objectives. Then what we did was have a team that combined inside with outside. I was leading the strategic efforts inside. Although I was an outsider, I was embedded into the organization. But our design team that led the thinking and design of the data visualization was at the University of Calgary with 2 fantastic profs, Sheila Carpendale and Wesley Willett with Jagoda. We had a very large team. We had also a team of coders. And then we collaborated with a number of other groups, depending on what stage we were at and what we were trying to do. But the interesting thing is that everyone, and the reason to partner with a university for the design, in our view, was that that capacity building, universities do that, and also to bring in experts that would talk to the data scientists and the data owners in the organization from a respectful place and from a curious place, not from, there was always collaboration. And interestingly enough, then everybody brings their best to the table. So soon enough, VisWorks, which is the software company, was also bringing a bunch of innovation. Everybody was egged on. We ended up identifying the core elements that we would visualize, but the strategic decision of what to visualize was a strategic decision, because we wanted to increase the complexity of the data sets as we moved along. So we started with really quantitative, and then we'd start mixing quantitative with qualitative until we ended up in basically really complex text-based data set. And also there were data sets that what was core to the organization, what they own, what data sets they actually own. And then we also ended up with data sets that we never got the data, or we never got the rights to publish the data. I mean, never, it's to the best of my knowledge, still an unresolved issue. So not everything was necessarily smooth and successful, let me tell you. And things didn't work according to plan, so we adapted. And even one of the visualizations that we did ended up being too complex and not particularly successful. So it's in process of revision. But overall, the important thing was to touch every corner of the organization with one experience of working collaboratively with this team. And so it wasn't so much about what we were visualizing also had the importance of working with a different team every time so that we could create an environment across the organization that understood a different way of working. So did we achieve our objectives? The fact that the organization now has a new CEO, he went from being the National Energy Board to being the Canadian Energy Regulator. Legislation changed. It has a board of directors, which didn't have it before. It has commissioners, which it didn't have. It had board members, which was a different type of board. It had the VP that was brought in to had this change after we changed towards the end of the initiative, is now been seconded for a COVID task force. So there is an acting VP. All of those changes, and you still have a really strong, vibrant data team that is in much request and in enormous demand. Maybe Jagoda can talk about how different that is.
Yes, well, I mean, I can definitely talk from my perspective. I think probably about 90% of the people that I currently work with are new, or at least new since I was on the UFC side. So lots of new people, lots of excitement for sure.
Yeah, it took us, actually, we planned to start the hiring on the second year of the data visualization initiative. We did not manage to do that almost until the end of the third year and after. And David is asking if I'm suggesting that these institutional changes are a consequence. The institutional change of the data team, the data and analytics team, is absolutely part of the data visualization initiative. Even the name, Use Data Visualization Initiative instead of data transformation on digital transformation, was done so that there would be less competition inside the organization and less murkiness about what we were doing, because nobody was competing with us to do a data. Well, that's not true. I'll tell you what, because that was one of the things that we didn't expect, is what kind of innovation it would spark. But we established a methodology. The organization has a pretty good sense of its core data sets, and it is seen as a leader. So that part, those main broad objectives were achieved. But more interesting, what we didn't expect. And that was really surprising to all of us in different ways and at different times. When we started innovating and creating the Data Visualization Initiative, which was well funded and commanded quite a bit of money, management, the other VPs would start getting, wow. Well, first the organization decided everybody could actually do data visualization, and the organization became the biggest subscriber of Tableau of the entire government of Canada. which they thought everybody wanted to say, I don't know why you're spending all this money in data visualization, because actually we can get Tableau and we can do the same thing for a fraction of the cost. So they all subscribed to Tableau, and we thought it was great. Like, great, wonderful. And still a lot of Tableau users. The other thing is that the other VPs became sort of open to the disruptors in their own units, because they wanted to showcase that they could do innovation as well. So all of the people that had been fighting to disrupt, all of a sudden had budget to disrupt. They were given birth to disrupt and space to disrupt. So there was a lot, and a lot of it we had to catch after, because they weren't initiatives that thought of a beginning, middle, and end, and integrated and thought about sustainability and a bunch of stuff. But those are things, that's a good problem to have. And it's not, it's a really good problem to have. We also, the data scientists learned that it wasn't sufficient for them to produce and to have the data sets that they use with 200 columns. They're still going to use that. Is that they are also responsible to produce a smaller, more concise data, a curated data set that can be used for other products. And that responsibility lies with them, data owners. So they have to produce a different number of data sets from the same database. That is their responsibility. We also were able to introduce a lot of new technology because we had the budget and the mandate. And a lot of times other units wanted to do it, but they couldn't do it because IT wouldn't buy, because they ended up with a bunch of fragmentation inside the organization. So they couldn't make it happen. But because we had the mandate to get it done, we were able to introduce data warehousing, APIs, and a bunch of other technologies because we just did it. So once you do it, you can't undo it. Once people see it, you can't unsee it. So now there is a data warehouse, and there's a lot of other things that are happening. And really, really interesting, we learned that data visualization is not enough. I mean, it's a step. It's definitely necessary, but it's not sufficient. And so when we partner with the Museum of Science and Technology and created material and data lesson plans for teachers to use using visualizations, our use sort of, Jagoda, why don't you show a little bit of what happened when that?
Sure. Yeah, so this is an example from the publication Energy Futures. It's a product that's published in a few different formats, and each of these bubbles, the smaller bubbles are formats with fewer page views, larger bubbles are formats with more page views. And so you'll see at the left here these middle-sized bubbles. This one is the HTML report that is put out every year. The red dot is the PDF report. At the top right is actually the raw data that's available on the website. And the big orange circle here, that's the visualization. And this is something that was very evident after those lesson plans were launched too. We saw a really big spike in the page views. What was interesting was the other products didn't lose audience, but the visualization gained an audience. And we know from, at least from the lesson plans, that those were new audiences as well.
So we thought this would be a good time to take a break. After our discussion, we can talk about all of the challenges which we haven't gotten there yet. But what do you guys think?
Yeah, that sounds great. I think it would be great to have a 15-minute break, or not a break, sorry, a question and answer session. So I would ask colleagues that have questions if they want to raise their hands. If you can raise your hand, if you have the power to raise your hand, raise your hand. Otherwise, put it in the chat, because I think some colleagues don't have the power. So raise your hands, and I'll call on you in succession. I think Ray has the first question. Ray, do you want to take the floor and ask your question?
Thanks so much for this. Just by way of introduction, I'm part of the digital transformation team for UNEP, and one of the aspects that you mentioned, I think, was about revenue and how this was funded, and almost to a point where it became so successful that it was able to generate more of its revenue, or and I think you touched on that really briefly. Can you explain more the business model around how you structured this? What was firstly, I guess, a data unit, and then it's become the digital transformation for you guys? Over.
Yeah. The data unit was part of the organization in what the government, in the funding of salaries of the organization. In the government of Canada, you have either funds that are your operating funds, or you have what is called O&M, sort of contracting money. There are two different streams. So the organization had access to O&M that's allocated depending on what it was. And the CEO, during the time when we were planning, it took about 9 months to plan the whole contracting, how it would be structured. And that was done through salaries and stuff. I was actually working even as a casual and in a different kind of in a different kind of position. And then it took 7 months to structure the contracts with the University of Calgary and with TheHesterView, which was I won a competitive contract. They were all competitive. Now the University of Calgary was a research contract. The coding was a competitive contract. The managing mine was a competitive contract. So we had those, and then we have graphic contracts, which was also competitive. The only different type of contract was the university, which was a research contract. It's just a different modality for the government. But all of the contracts were 3-year options. They were 1 year with renewable for 2 years, with funds allocated for 3 years.
So what was the total value of that bundle?
I would have to look because each one of them was separate, but I would say probably 2, 4, 6, 5 million over Canadian, 5-6 million over all together with all the other contracts, 5-6 anywhere among that over ended up almost 4 years, 3 years.
And I think the other question Ray is kind of implicitly asking is basically, it sounds like to me what you guys did is you created a center of excellence and kind of a visualization accelerator outside the organization. Basically, rather than creating it inside, you externalized it. and we're looking at creating something internal, and we're looking at how do we actually create a business model and the right incentives so that people get the advice they need in the kind of time they need. And I think the big question is, you can externalize this help for a while, but how do you eventually make it mainstream it, right? As the sustainability question.
That's how we did it, because I didn't think we didn't have the salary money to be able to bring the people that we would need it. And it's not clear that you can attract this kind of talent, because what happened is, because we became a leader in the government of Canada, we all of a sudden attracted people like Jagoda. If you said to Jagoda, you're gonna go a PhD, a top PhD, Jagoda is among the top PhD in their visualization in the world. It is that. The VP that was attracted from the government of Canada is now one of the leads in rapid testing for COVID. Ryan Hum. That's also why, would have, Jagoda and I talked about, it would be really neat to have Ryan's view on a conversation like this. But Ryan is brilliant, but he wouldn't have come. He wouldn't have accepted a position if he didn't see that this was an organization that was really going places and really was ready to do transformation and would have that. So I think that it's a matter of doing a model that it shows so much value to the organization that when it comes time to hire, you have the buy-in to hire. And now the teams are big and they are hiring more because they actually went to the system, to the federal government, and asked for more budget, and were given more budget because they are recognized as an organization that actually knows how to implement. They were also so it led to a bunch of different changes, and the sustainability came from the disruption, and from doing that, it took longer, but now it's being run from salary, not all of it, but from a combination, but much more salary than O&M.
Can I just ask, I'm looking for other hands. I'm not seeing other hands right now, so I'll jump in with a follow-up question, and then if there are other hands or other people want to put a question in the chat, they can. So you talked about, this is our challenge as well, you talked about the fact that the organization has to continue to deliver while you're also doing disruption, right? So how do you simply manage the transition between old and new? I'm thinking, like, on your website, how did you handle the old website versus the new visualization and avoid kind of a Frankenstein approach? And then how did you roll those different visualizations out over time and kind of manage the new again with the old? Like, give us a sense of how you manage that sort of complexity between sort of analog versus digital, and the progression that you did over the digital side.
I'm going to let Jagoda talk about the engagement, but every time we rolled visualization, first we had an initiative. So by being an initiative, we could mitigate the Frankenstein type thing because we were doing something different. So for a while before we were completely integrated, we had a sort of a little space for our initiative in the website that became known as that space. It was a new experiment. It was like a pilot. It was not as well explained. But every time we had a new visualization, we had an entire strategy of rollout. And we would roll it out internally and we roll it out externally, and we had big open houses. And Jagoda, why don't you talk about the engagement? The engagement was so much fun. And
yeah, well, I think you just mentioned the open houses. Those were a really key piece because they allowed us to demo these visualizations in person, right? And then we also extended that to to some public events at libraries. At the end of the initiative, we did a big engagement at the Calgary Public Library. It was a full day event, right? We brought in speakers. We had big screens set up. We organized it to sort of attract attention. We brought in the data experts. So it was a whole thing of trying to connect the data experts through the visualization to either internal staff or to the public.
Yeah, I was going to say we also took the opportunity in conferences and other partners and demo the stuff all the time. And one of the things that was really interesting is that I know pipelines, as you all know, are super controversial. And people get very passionate, pro and against, and in Canada is a very big deal. So one of the things that was really interesting is that we could demo data viz no matter where, and people were always they were always open to conversation. We never had contentious conversations because it was about data and it was about this beautiful product, and people were always curious. So you ended up talking about the actual data and the visualization and not whether pipelines are good or bad or and it was a very different experience for the data visualization for the experts of the organization which were used to going out and having people interact with them in a very different way.
Can I just follow up on that, and then we can go back into the presentation? I'm not seeing other hands, but I'm going to take the chair's prerogative to ask one more question. And I love this insight you shared, which is about the fact that you actually have to design the data set itself, right? And I'm wondering does that mean you actually sort of thought through the story you wanted to tell with a data set and then kind of reverse engineered backwards? Or like, can you explain that a little bit more? Because I think that's one of our challenges is, data is ultimately all about good storytelling, and sometimes the data doesn't lead to a good story. So how do you sort of balance, it out and sort of just walk us through how you did that?
I could take that a little bit. I mean, that is actually a key part of the design process, and I think us as the design team being a little bit naive in terms of the data and not knowing what we were going to find led us to ask questions that I'm sure the data experts sometimes would find just strange or unexpected, and definitely uninformed. But we would, I guess I should say, we would start by getting the data set and just exploring it ourselves, just digging in and trying to understand, first of all, what's not working, and what we don't understand. And we'd also look at the shape of the data set and generally how that data flows. We would also do workshops with data experts. These would be half day to a full day workshops. This was probably the most valuable part of our process, and I think what made this collaboration work, because we were external, we were removed from the day-to-day of the data experts. But for that one day at least, we would get to sit down with them and just interrogate. We'd get them to tell us about the data set. We would actually sit down and we'd pull out paper and markers and group up with data experts with a sample of the data and say, okay, tell me what you see here. Sometimes they would draw with us, sometimes we would draw. We would do, a little presentation at the end. And we would take the findings from this day and kind of mull it over and try to find what was capturing our interest. And we would go back and then present our understanding of the data set later. But I have to say, sitting down with the data experts, there was always something interesting. It might not have always felt like a complete cohesive story, but there was always, that one incident that happened at this time, maybe it was a little funny story, or maybe it was a serious incident or something. But I was just always amazed at the incredible knowledge base of the data experts, and that wasn't always encoded into the data set, of course, right? And our goal wasn't always to showcase one single story. Sometimes we wanted to be a little bit more, I guess, amenable to exploration and less imposing story. But we always wanted to make sure that those little nuggets that we found, you'd be able to find in that visualization.
Yeah, it's also important to note that we were aiming for creating exploratory data sets, not necessarily data journalism. Also, every time when we have the methodology on the report that you shared, but sometimes if it's interesting, there is a very specific methodology because the data exploration takes a long time, and it always took a long time. And we had a methodology. We created a brief to begin with, talking about the data, gave that to the university, to the coders, and said, this is what this data set is about. Gave them a sample of the data. They played around with it. They came back. So there was a constant back and forth. But once they analyzed what was possible to do, we then got back to a meeting with management. And it was very, very careful. I'm always very careful to when to ask opinions, because people will give them and then you have to do something with it. So be careful for what you wish for. And everybody will, and people want different things for different people, and you can't. You have to curate it for something. So at some point, we had to go back to management and say, this data set can be represented either for use for this audience or for use for this audience. I can't do both. I don't have the budget, the time, the money. I can't do both. Either this or this. Your choice. You tell us what is the principal audience. And they would say, okay, X. And then when we rolled it out, some people would criticize it, that it wasn't something different. And we would say, intentionally, this is our audience. And we've never heard management criticize us on that. That was really, really interesting because they made the decision. So, and decisions have to be made. You can't be all things to all people. What a specialist uses to make their analysis is not the same as a general public to get a view. It's different. It's different. One is going to work who needs 200 columns, and you can't visualize 200 columns. Not this way. You might need analytics, and you might need AI, and you might need a bunch of other tools. Interesting, yes. And do we use different visualizations for that? Yes, and. It's a yes, and. So I think so, really important also. And also to understand that every data set is amenable to a different type of visualization. I mean, the dashboard, everybody wants dashboard. Dashboards have their uses, but a good friend of ours, of Jagoda, and I was on a call with him yesterday. Well, actually, Jeremy from the UNDP accelerators, Jeremy Boy. So Jeremy, I was on a call with him, and he says, "Oh, we talked about dashboards," and he says, "Yes, and they come from cars." And I keep telling people that if you keep looking at your dashboard, you are very likely to run into a tree. So,
but essential to have in the vehicle. I think we're moving to into a major investment in dashboards to measure program impact. But as you say, it's yes and. So yeah. So why don't we? I think there are some other questions coming in, but why don't we continue with the presentation? And I suspect you might hit some of these questions in your presentation, and then we'll circle back. If you don't, we'll circle back to them. So why don't you guys continue with the PowerPoint now?
Yeah, the multi-layer approach. Pooja was asking a nice example of multi-layer. We can talk about challenges, and then what about if we demo the incidents?
Sure. Do you want to do the demo first, Annette, or do you want to go straight into
no,
challenges?
what do you guys prefer? Do you want to talk about challenges, or do you want a demo?
Well, let's go with challenges, and then we'll save the best for last.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Just get some sharing going here. Okay.
What are the limits for the data audience to get their own version of visualizations? I don't think, depends on the data set, but I think it's also on how people absorb information, and that's a whole field of studies. And we spend a lot of time understanding the data visualization specialists and the designers, not just UX on how they interact with the data, but also how people absorb information. This is one of my areas of passion, and I think we are learning to work with data very differently, and that's what I like the lesson plans, and I really believe in introducing young children to data visualization, exploratory data visualization, so that they learn how to work with data and how to go through the process of working with data. Challenges, you were talking before about how do you transfer that knowledge inside, from the outside to inside. Huge challenge. Huge challenge. We had capacity building written in all our contracts. Our contracts had to have capacity building, and they also had to have open. We had to be able to publish everything. Everything was open source, open code. All of the visualizations are published. The code is published in GitHub. Everything was open. How to do... So that part was hard because we didn't have a counterpart to transfer knowledge to, and it took double amount of time to get people hired and the contracting and all the hiring. It happened, and Jagoda is proof that it happened. We had the talent that is there now. I have a PhD from Princeton in behavior psychology. There is amazing people in there now, but it was a huge challenge, not to be discounted. We couldn't do that problem of data ownership, and it's huge. We couldn't do the layer asset because we managed to go through the ownership, and we would be able to do that. But we would run into problems to publish the data and do an open source the data. I know you're going to run into this problem, and there isn't an easy fix. That's why we went to identify what were the data sets that belong to the organization and did those first, because we had issues. We wanted to do the layer asset from the beginning, because we wanted to offer a different design to Esri, which I'm not going to go into Esri design here, but not a fan. So how could we do that? And we got to the design. We have the design documents. And by the way, one of the innovations that the University of Calgary did is that now they have a new process of designers talking to coders. which is a huge improvement in data visualization. And that's something new that was created with this, that now is in the scientific community. Ongoing risk to sustainability, changing of mandates, priorities, human resource allocation, was really a struggle. And it took a super committed CEO, a super committed top management that said, stop it, we are doing it. Like, enough already. Because it gets very contentious when it comes to the resource allocation. The O&M wasn't as bad. It wasn't as much of a deal. It was easier to maneuver around the O&M. It was not easy to maneuver inside the salary allocation. It was super tough. And the usage, that integration. So David, you write on how did you go from that usage outside and data visualization into usage inside and part of every day of the organization with difficulty. And it's still with difficulty. But changes in culture are incremental and they take time. And but they gain momentum. And I think now you are in a geometric progression for that organization. So it's moving much faster, but it takes time. Yes, so I think those were very big challenges.
Can I just jump in right there at the challenge point? Just before you continue, and this goes back to Ray's question about the business model. So and this is up to Jagoda, how does it work now? Like, is there a team that does this, that offers advisory services to the rest of the organization, or do they pay for it? What's the business model today that allows this to continue?
So it's essentially what Annette has talked about. We're in the data and information management unit, which is an internal services kind of unit, and it's project based. So I'm involved in doing data visualization or kind of design related projects as decided at the organization level.
What's the incentive for the internal groups to come to you versus go externally again?
So I'm not sure I'm the right person to know exactly. From my perspective, people know we exist, and they want it's the place to go, right? You have a data problem, you want it visualized, you come to us, right?
I was going to say, no, I think that the thing that works is if you go externally, they don't have access to the internal, and they can't change, and they can't do internal changes to the system. And
I think the issue is that sometimes if you have these data and information teams, their pipeline can get so jammed up that you just can't get sort of quick delivery of services in the timeline for your projects, and therefore you get forced to go external. And so I'm just wondering how you manage that pipeline so you maintain the confidence of your colleagues that if they come to you, you're going to deliver in a timely way. Because if you undermine that confidence, then everybody goes external, and it's just sort of a dog's breakfast of stuff. So do you see that happening, or did you solve that problem?
I was going to say, I think this is more of a work in progress. Because it's not totally solved, but it is forcing the organization as a whole to choose to prioritize projects. The team is limited, and the organization has to do an organization-wide, and then it becomes a management issue. It's a management issue on what are the key functions that they are going to do, and what are the key projects, and then have not standards, but a way of operating with outside partners that even when they bring projects in, they are very much coherent with everything else. One of the things that happened, for instance, is we did a competitive contract with a graphic company that does graphics and does the regular layouts, and they can do videos, they can do a bunch of stuff. But they have become so aware of everything else that when people go to them directly, now the whole organization goes to them, but the stuff is really coherent. So you start creating momentum, and you become that unit becomes more of a standard, so that even when other suppliers come in, and they do, because you can't do it all, they use that and even consult with the unit as a standard, or so you can be a consultant to the units, but you could also be a consultant to other contractors to just keep things moving. So you just have to be like, you have to walk and chew gum.
I can also offer sort of it's just a personal opinion, really, but there's, we're sort of suffering from an information overload problem as a society, right? And these kinds of products are, I mentioned earlier, right? It's a lot of work to create one of these. I really think it's worth thinking about, where do you actually want to put that effort, and what is the most important or the most impactful place that you can create these information products, that you can draw attention to your products. It might be a way to guide some of the prioritization. I know it's a little bit separate from what happens when you have too many projects, but it's not always appropriate to put this whole effort around visualizing something. And sometimes you can do it in a much easier, smaller scale way, like using the existing visualization tools that are out there.
Yeah, somebody was asking if we had involved another complementary analysis previous to the data visualization. We in the beginning of the data visualization, we take everything we can from that data set, including all the analysis and everything. Absolutely. You gain as much. The exploratory part is intense, and it takes a long time until you understand. When we did conditions, was a beast, which are the conditions that you impose on pipelines for them to be built. And they are legal documents. It's really, really, really hard to think of that data set. It's so complex. But there was a lot of analytical and a lot of different things that had been done, and even in order to learn. So we use all of that. And in terms of data confidentiality and ethics, always maintain that this is government, and that's and even an enormous amount of respect for indigenous data, for data that the organization had collected at different times from indigenous people. There is all of that. But the process of university ethics and our own government ethics on research, this was a research project, and it had to respond to the University of Calgary ethics consultation, and so did we inside the organization through the Government of Canada. So absolutely, yes. Yes and yes to all of that. Absolutely, without a doubt. So we also, so the challenges, you still have resistance. That's part of the that's part of change, right? Change is not linear, and it's not sort of like that. It goes up and down, and it has it's got highs and lows. There is resistance at some points, but I find that it's mostly sort of a way forward, and it's part. And the interesting to me is that the resistance is not whether you should have it or not have it, is who's going to get it, or who's going to be first, or sort of it changed the type of resistance and the type of control and so on. But I think ultimately, once you go down that road, there isn't a way back.
All right.
So is this the time where you're going to wow us with the live demo?
We can certainly do so. I'll stop sharing, and then I'll bring up a demo, but you can feel free to ask some questions now too. I know there are a few in the chat.
I would say go with the demo, and as if we see questions, if Pooja, I see that you've been chatting quite a bit, and Yashwan, if you want to come in at any point with questions, please take the floor.
Yeah, and definitely, Pooja, not all projects warrant data viz. No, some things you do easily. That's why you need to have a variety of tools. And as people become, when you work with that data viz team, then people become more digitally and visually competent. So then it becomes easier to kind of go, when should we do a dashboard? And when should we do an infographic? Sometimes all you need is an infographic. It's more of a story that you need to tell. You do an infographic, you're done. So it's just really good to then focus, if you are going to go through a custom build visualization, that be one of the data sets that is core to the organization. So, and part of the beauty of doing this kind of transformation is that in the process, the organization becomes aware of what's its core. It reminds itself, right? It's like doing a scan. It reminds itself, what are our core business? What is core? If we have to be known for a data set, what do I want to be known for? If people are going to go and say data on emissions or whatever it is the first data set that they're going to look for, is it yours? That's where you want to get to.
I think that's actually a crisis that we're having at the moment. Not a crisis, a bit strong word, but exactly that, defining our identity at this moment in time, in the context of digitalization, in the context of the current geopolitics. What is the value that UNEP can add to the world? Exactly where is that value? So we've just adopted this medium-term strategy, and we're right now in that process of understanding where that value lies and what is our role in this data landscape. So as you say, this is incredibly timely, and I love the idea that this can help us really focus in on that value add. Yeah. So Jagoda, do you want to whiz bang show us the whiz bang and all the amazing visualization that you brought forward?
All right. Well, I thought we'd start with this visualization of pipelines or incidents at pipelines and facilities. Can everyone see this? It's showing up, right? Yeah, so this is the aforementioned visualization that started as 100 columns, and we just picked out a handful. And actually the idea behind this visualization is that you can see each column and how it relates to other columns. And once you know how to read one column, you can read the rest. So this is showing reported incidents that are mandated to be reported to the CER and kind of the proportional amounts. So what you'll see here is that Alberta has the most incidents. This is also because it has the most pipeline facilities in Canada. And when I hover over Alberta, I can see how many incidents in Alberta were related to a release of substance. Oh, sorry, if I just click in here, it should stay. How many were related to a release of substance, operation beyond design limits, which basically means, you know, something just wasn't operating as it was designed. So maybe it was, you know, slightly too high of a pressure or something. Whether there was a fire, and then as I hover over here, there are some other issues like serious injury, adverse environmental effects, and so on. And so I can basically dig into these incidents, and I get sort of a sense of what the relationship is. Before I move in to bring other columns, I'm actually just going to also point out that you can select individual incidents as well, and that gives you sort of where it was, what it was. So what I'm looking at here is a fire near Edson, and these incidents can be of various severity. I know one of these fire incidents is somebody drove a lawnmower onto the territory of a pipeline and it caught fire. But all of this has to be reported. So, you know, I can bring in the what happened column. And apologies for being a little bit slow. I think my computer is kind of suffering under the weight of Teams here, but hopefully this gets in there. Yes. Yeah, and so then you can start to see, you know, what kinds of incidents are the most common. Well, generally you'll have external interference followed by incorrect operation and equipment failure, and so on and so forth. So these are columns you can play around with. You can move these around depending on what you're interested in. I might not bring up the map right now just because my computer is being very slow, but I wanted to point out a couple of other things that might interest you specifically. It's less so about the data, but the way or the features we included in the visualization. First of all, as much help as possible, right? Trying to explain to people what it is that they are looking at in context. We always have a methodology document that explains how the data for the visualization was collected. You know, we always have when was the data last updated, and a way to download the original data file, which was a really big piece of this. Actually, it was really important to us that once we do all the work to make the visualization, that you can also take that data file and run with it yourself. We also included a little data stories kind of version here. So you can, this first one is just a tutorial, but it overlays on top of the visualization and essentially teaches you how to read this. So as you can see, this is very much geared towards people who maybe don't know that much about this data. And it wouldn't work on a day-to-day basis for data experts to use on their own because it doesn't include all of those columns. Although I do remember during the demonstrations, the internal launch, people were asking, oh, can we have this just with more columns? So it definitely resonated. But it has, you know, it has been used by internal staff when they're explaining certain things about incidents to people they're talking to outside. Annette, is there anything you wanted to add?
Yes, I was thinking, for instance, things that we learned. People are always fascinated with saying, well, let's do a little video. Let's do a video of the visualizations and to explain how to use it. Do you know how often we update this stuff? Then every time you update it, you end up with a video that is not up to date. So it's a lot easier to do other things. So we learn in practicality that things that look like a no-brainer, let's just do that, are actually brainers and cost a lot of money. and time to update. We also found interesting that this is used as an engagement tool. Jagoda was just mentioning that, but there is a lot of resistance in Quebec to building pipelines. But when there were meetings in the Quebec with the Quebec municipalities, and they raised the point that there is a lot of incidents and it could cause a lot of problems, the specialist was able to pull this visualization, show Quebec, and say, you know what? If you put Quebec in there, Jagoda, can you put Quebec just to show it's actually a really small percentage of. Anyway, it's
find Quebec in here.
Yeah, no, it's further down. Yeah. I have mine always set because I use that example. So out of all of the incidents, and this gets updated, it could be updated daily if that's what the organization wanted, but there's only 36 since 2008. So it was really like out of all of those incidents in Canada, this is how many happened here. And why did they happen? Because operations beyond design limits. And if you don't know what that is, there is a question mark on the top that you can go and explain. So there is different things embedded that will explain exactly what this is. So basically, it was a conversation that was able to explain to an entire municipality that if they are going to talk about evidence, that was a non-issue. So it kind of disappeared really easily from the conversation because there was no basis to make that argument. So you start moving from the idea of evidence-based decisions to actual evidence-based decisions. But I consider forming opinions making a decision. And I think that is particularly relevant when it comes to climate and climate change, because people form opinions, and they form opinions based on what? And then it becomes this cacophony of voices and information and that overload that Jagoda was mentioning. So having really good, clear, concise data would be such a help.
Annette, can I just ask a question on that side? Sorry for interrupting. You talked originally about this data unit, and that the data unit sort of became a specialization in reporting. And I'm just wondering, so you talked about the need for really defining the end user very carefully. So who is the end user at the moment for this particular visualization? Like, how are you tracking use? How are you tracking kind of downloads of the data and sort of, I guess, influence at the end of the day? How are you tracking influence and sort of decision making based on this data?
Jagoda, do you want to, I mean, it's for us in a way, you have to remember what was important to us and what we wanted to measure when we were talking about the visualizations. We wanted to measure transformation to the organization. And people often think, okay, let's measure the use and the download, and we measure differently, because in order for you to collect data from interactive visualizations, it's different, and you have to code it differently. So we had to code everything very differently, and our metrics were very different. But our objective overall was the change into the organization. We weren't as concerned with, is the visualization being used, as the process that led us to that. So be careful when people often use that argument. Oh, but so you're not getting as many users. We get quite a bit, but you're not getting as many or this or that. And our CEO used to say, yeah, if that was my objective, I would be really concerned with that. That was not my objective, and that's not what I'm measuring. That's not on where we are going. That said, what we found is that when you parallel your visualizations with other products, then with engagement, with lesson plans, with a bunch of other products, then you have like a huge uptake. In their own, if they're just on the ozone and nobody's using them, it depends on how you're going to talk about them. But we also really look at time on page, return visitors, and time on page, because what you want is those visualizations being used as a tool. Are they a tool? And if they are a tool, then people will engage for long periods of time. And the amount of time that we get on those visualizations was always extraordinary for regular web products. At least that's my experience. Jagoda, do you have a different experience?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yes. Time on page is a really big one, and it usually indicates, I mean, we can only guess, but we think it indicates, at least for the most part, people coming in and actually exploring around. We've also seen this at our engagement events. We've had people at these library events, we've had people come by and sit down at one of our individual computers and sit there for half an hour exploring, and then come and ask questions. So that's a really good indication. And I see a couple of questions around here about, what people are clicking on and so on. So we sort of have, and every visualization has improved this a little bit. That we've learned a few things along the way in terms of how to do the analytics, and it's based on Google Analytics, but we do have some restrictions. So we can sort of get a sense for how many times has this been clicked on, how many times has that been clicked on. We aren't able to get pathways to see, where do people start and where do they end up, because I guess there are privacy issues with that sort of thing. So I know we asked about this previously, but we did, while I was still at the U of C, we were actually getting those analytics and sort of hand creating these heat maps at the time to try and figure out where some of the clicks were happening.
We did the visual one. Remember, we did the study on the visual, and then we learned that nobody was using that top in the Explore Energy Futures.
That's right. So, and this was before I started, but
oh yeah.
But I do remember this study. So on Energy Futures, the first version, we actually had someone come in who is an eye tracking study expert, and did an eye tracking study, and actually that's part of where we got some of the information about, people don't necessarily click on videos, and people aren't necessarily looking at the menus here. So there's a lot of detail you can get into, and it unfortunately tends to only apply to the one visualization that you have, right? It's very difficult to extrapolate from one visualization to another, but there are methods to look at this.
Yeah, we actually had put something on the top of a screen on the first iteration of Energy Futures, which we thought was really important information, and I don't think one person looked at it. It was, there was a dud. We went, oh, that's not a smart thing to do. Yeah, didn't work. But we did that tracking, and then we had to analyze all of the data points that was the biggest thing. We said, oh, let's do the study on where people are looking at. So we tracked that. And then there were so many data points that had to be analyzed. We were all going like, oh, what are we going to do with this? How are you going to, we need a summer student just to analyze this one study. So we learn a lot by doing. The thing about Google Analytics with interactive visualizations, and maybe it's better now, but we have to code it very differently when you code in the visualizations to be able to get the information you need. and to be compliant with privacy and all that stuff. So it is not, and then the other metrics of the organization, because you have to have when you land on the page and then the time on page. So, and your URL is not changing. So you can be moving visualizations, but so you have different things that you are tracking. But then when you want to compare it with the static ones in the organization, then it becomes really almost a game. So sometimes I think that how like using analytics, yes, and at the same time with a grain of salt or 2 grains of salt, because it becomes I've seen it used quite as a game, and how to get your numbers up, and there's lots on how you coded to be able to get things up. So I was personally less concerned with that and more concerned with the big macro trends. I was trying to think, Pooja, when we started conditions, we were getting 3 minutes on page, even the beginning. Do you remember that stats on how much time on page? Because I know that energy futures increased quite a bit. I'd have to look to see the time on page, but it was really.
There were some that even
different.
went into 6 or 7 minutes. That one's a long one.
Yeah, but we were getting, and a lot of return visitors. But I can tell you that when we created the Inter-American Development Bank Energy Database, which compares countries, and it's more on the line or something perhaps that you would look at doing because it's got member states and so on. And we're doing a bunch of other things. What happened was that we ended up becoming the most used database in the bank within 6 months of launching, just because of the quality of the graphics. And when we open, there was also an ownership issue because it was the International Energy Agency. And I don't have to go into that, but when for a time that the data was open, then it was used by all of the universities in the US. We did a tour of universities in the US, and all of the grad students, all of the students were using it on their papers. And that just puts your usage to the stratosphere, because every student wants good data and easy to access data to do their papers.
Can I put a pause there? There's a bunch of questions that have come in the chat, and I wanted to sort of make sure that people have time, if it's okay. We've got about 18 minutes left in the session. It's been fantastic so far, so I thank you very much. Susan had a question on addressing data gaps. Susan, do you want to take the floor and ask your question? Susan Richards, are you there? Are you still with us?
Yes, I am. Thanks, David. Sorry, just trying to unmute myself.
No worries.
So basically, I was just wondering, because there's usually data gaps in gender and indigenous people's data. I can see that CER has a gender-based analysis plus program and an indigenous engagement program. And so I was just wondering, what strategies do you have in place to get everyone working on different thematic areas to contribute to these data sets? Because sometimes I find the focus is on the core business. So sometimes some of these get left behind. So how do you go about that? Thanks.
Thanks, Susan.
The thing about it is there is a lot of different strategies currently, but being that we don't speak for the CER right now and about their current strategies, and this is more of what were we looking at during the data visualization initiative. What I can say is that we looked in this process, once we were done and we were thinking about it, once we had our engagement and all of the elements in place to be able to do those analyses, the organization put as a priority to work on those data sets. So it was a matter of maturity in many levels. It wasn't enough to have digital maturity. The organization, when we started the process, didn't have a maturity, didn't have the gender base, didn't have the indigenous group there. So part of this whole change management that the CEO put in place also created different units that would allow the organization to then marry the data with the indigenous. So I thank you for the question, and it points out how complex and how it's not black and white, and it doesn't lends itself to this easy, there isn't an easy solution because it's easily forgotten and you need to have intent to do it. And once you have intent to put the dollar, put your money where your mouth is to actually get it done.
Thanks, Annette. Maybe we move on to the question. I think there's a great question from Luis Felipe. If you're still with us, do you want to take the floor?
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Luis Felipe Kiama. I work for the Sustainable Mobility Unit in the United Nations Environment Program. We have been talking about the data visualization, and I'm pretty sure that there are some analysis on the back that maybe are important to develop before showing the data. So I would like to know if you, for example, implement some kind of let's say, a statistic analysis before the data visualization, and or what are the other skills or yes, technical knowledge do you have to have as a complementary to develop the data visualization? And thank you very much for this great presentation.
Thanks, Luis. And maybe Luisa, maybe I'll just add to that. If this has enabled you to start looking at sort of predictive analytics, so is this allowing you to sort of start to make predictions about the future? So you could answer both of those, that would be great.
So I think, any data visualization it requires someone to understand the data and know how to do it, know what it's about, know how to prepare it. You need someone who can take that data and translate it into a visual representation. You need someone who can develop that visualization. You need someone who can create the back-end data infrastructure to make sure that's flowing. I think it's a little bit separate from something like predictive analytics. I think you can do predictive analytics on your data and then see where that takes you in your visualization, right? I can actually put up, this isn't exactly predictive analytics, it's modeling, but the Canada's Energy Future visualization it's a model, right? So it's data based on a model. And just one thing we've done in the visualization is as the years go further out, as we have a further and further out prediction, the visualization fades out, right? So we are responding to what the data is like. It of course helps. It helps to have somebody there who understands the meaning behind it and has done all the statistical analysis. But yeah, it's hard to say that one is required. It's more of it's a bunch of components working together.
I would say, yeah, I was just going to say that from an organization perspective, all of the data teams of the data sets we chose have a multitude of tools and circumstances that they use with their data set. That's why they always said, you saying my baby's ugly. What are you talking about? I work with this. I do analysis on this. It is not perfect, but it's been serving us to do a million different things that we've been doing for decades. And now you telling me this is imperfect or ugly or whatever, or that I don't have a clue of what I'm doing.
Not a way to win friends.
I know, but we do that all the time.
It will highlight things. I mean, I know once you see your data in a visualization, you might go, oh, that's not right. I wasn't expecting that. And of course, you have gone through the work to prepare a data pipeline that spits data into a visualization. It could just as easily then be adapted for, say, a predictive analytics model, right? It's doing the work to clean up the data.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of what I meant. Is did this sort of drive demand for people to say, well, what's next? Did it lead into sort of predictive analytics demand?
Oh yes, because what happened? Absolutely, I forgot about that. But we said we're going to talk about it. Thank you. Thanks, Louise. But one of the byproducts, the best byproduct of a data visualization, is a totally structured data set. It is structured, it is organized, it's there, and it happens. And what we found is that the specialists clean up. They actually go and change their main data set. The main one with the 200 columns is a much better data set, because they start saying, oh, this doesn't make any sense here. If it doesn't make sense here, it actually doesn't make sense here either. Why am I holding on to this, which doesn't make sense? I should change this. So they have this thing, and you will end up with overall structured data sets. And from that, then there's been word recognition and a bunch of other things that now will launch another bunch of other products. And I would strongly encourage you in later session to engage with the CER and ask them to tell you about the projects they have going on now, and you will see an evolution, exactly the evolution that you're talking about, because you have those data sets.
Thanks for that. I was going to ask if Jagoda, you had put a bunch of links on a slide. I think you had 6 different links of the 6 different products. If you could just drop those links into the chat. I think people are asking for the direct links because they don't have access to the slides yet. And while you're doing that, I want to hand the floor to Yashwin. If Yashwin, if you're still here, I think you had a couple of questions that I thought were really interesting. If you want to take the floor and ask those, that would be great.
Hi, and David, thank you. Let me see whether I can turn on my camera quickly. And thanks a lot for the great presentation and opportunity to ask a question. Indeed, I think one question has already been addressed in terms of the limits for all data audience to get the visualization, and also see in the checkbox people start to also to talk about API related data access towards a different level of capacity of audience. So I guess one strategy and lesson learned from this presentation is data visualization is always a good way to get the audience more engaged, and also an entry point for us perhaps to identify the capacity of our audience. But in the end, for us in UNEP, we are facing such a group, like a wide group of audience, and like asking for different purpose of data. So eventually, we still need to explore the model, how we can have more tailored way of engaging customers, our data customers. So my earlier question was more like a management related question, since we are considering to deploy data specialists in our team in the future. So I had a question is also because in the past, when we do the digital twin of the digital twin of the Earth, that session, we have heard that there's always some miscommunication between the technical experts and the data experts. So I found it very interesting when you say that it is the data specialist responsible for the data for the purpose of data reusation. So I wonder what kind of skill sets would you actually expecting those data specialists to have when they're on board, and do you actually think within the current human resource market you can find the ready like package data specialist that fit this kind of organizational purpose? Thank you.
Thanks,
that's a great question. I had a slide about this one time. You know, it used to be that people making data visualizations were the data analysts, they were the data engineers, and they were the developers as well as the designers. They could do it all. But these projects have gotten very, very complex. I think you can have any, you will probably need a couple of different people and a certain combination of skills. And there's not going to be one pattern that fits. In the DVI, it was very, very clear that there were the data experts at the CER. There was a design team. There was the management of the project. That's Annette, right? And there were the developers. And that was probably the extreme of how you can organize a project like this with very separate teams. You can also try integrating a little bit more and having a little more overlap in skill sets. But I don't think that you'll get one person who can do it all.
No, I was going to say every project is different. I've done a few of those at big organizations. And I think that I hear you. And it's about building teams. And what are the right teams for the kind of project that you need to do? How do you marry the people from inside with outside? How do you create that? Each organization is different, but I'm involved with a publishing of a new book on Florence Nightingale, 1850, and you look, the mother of data visualizations and so on, the Nightingale Rose, etc. She had a huge team. It was never sort of one person. It's a collective effort to put this, because you need many different skills. And just a comment that there are multi audiences, and the same data set is going to have to be presented in many different ways to satisfy different audiences. Some people want an API, some people are gonna, it is just one or the other. But the beauty of it is that once you produce a structured data set, you can produce all of the other, then they become just a technology issue, not a data issue. And of course, ownership and so on. But once you have that solved, multivariate audiences is not unique to UNEP.
Thanks, Annette. I know we have to wrap up. We've got a couple minutes left. I just wanted to hand the floor for the final question over to Pooja. Please go ahead, Pooja.
Thank you, David, and thank you so much. My connection is a little bit unstable, so I'll just stick to audio. Annette and Jagoda, it's been fantastic. I found myself nodding on so many instances because, you know, from resources to platforms to insights to data, it's so much of the same thing. So thank you for being that sounding wall. I think my question is more on the technology side today. This exploratory model, did you build that on Tableau, or what sort of platform did your developers use, or was it a hybrid combination? And then how was the integration experience? Sorry, just the last part. How was the integration to the website experience?
So I can speak to the behind the visualization. These were custom developed visualizations, which is why we had this company VisWorks working with us, and they were based on React, which is a fairly well-known web framework.
Great. Okay, so they were React based.
Yes, that's right. And Annette has pointed out all of the source code, it's all open source. It's all available on GitHub through the Canada Energy Regulator account, which I can provide a link
it's still
for later.
under NEB, I think. Yeah, I think it's still under NEB. Last time I checked. Yeah, and the integration with the website is not the harder integration that we had, and where we sweated a bit, was integrating with the data systems and the web. The web servers. There's two web services behind it. One to make the data faster. So there's a bunch of technical stuff that took us a little bit to figure it out, how to make it faster and also how to make it secure. So you can't use a visualization to get into the system and into the data lake, and from there into the system. So there's a couple of technical stuff that had to happen. And that integration took more time for us to figure it out. We sweated quite a bit it wasn't simple.
Yeah.
Once we figured it out, it was okay, but boy, it took time.
I can imagine. We are doing some dashboards right now, some widgets, and we're having the same sort of back and forth. And, I would love to know more, but I'll save it, for an email. I think an important part of this is the data query as well, because S3 and that with more queries, and I see Ray nodding already, but that can get really expensive. So how are you caching that? Things like that, much technical, but I'll do a follow-up to find out more on that. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you.
Yeah, the data query was on that web service thing. Anyway, but yes.
Great. Well, thank you, Pooja, for the last question, and Jagoda and Annette, thank you so much. I think that was a stunning example of exactly, using a really interesting pathway to achieve digital transformation without calling it that necessarily. And I think what you said was really interesting, that the product, the platform was actually only the output. The outcome was the process. The process you got there was really what you were aiming for. And that's what's really important about this. And I think that's what we can't lose sight of. So as we begin to take forward digital transformation and look at these outputs, we need to be constructing the right process around them to achieve the kind of outcomes that you guys achieved. So bravo, hats off, wonderful deep dive, wonderful digital discovery session. We will definitely be following up with you again to really sort of verify that where we're moving in this space is the right direction. We'd love to get your thoughts on that. So thank you again. Really appreciate the time, and we'll be in touch.
Yeah,
thank you so
much. It was
much.
Great. Thank you for the opportunity, and I definitely wish you well on your journey. You're asking all the right questions. You're doing a lot of the right things, I think, to get there. So congratulations to you. Courage. Yes, a whole lot of courage and and persistence. And don't take no for an answer. I never do. So it's almost like no now, or in 5 minutes, can I ask again?
Great. Thanks for that advice. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to log off now. Thanks again.
Bye, everyone.
Ciao.